In the deepest, most chaotic corners of existence, where reality frays and madness is the native tongue, a name is whispered. It's a name that carries the weight of primordial rage and cold, alien intellect. It is the name of a being whose very existence is a contradiction, a war fought within a single body. This is the story of the Prince of Demons, the sibilant beast, the lord of all that swims and slithers. This is the lore of Demogorgon. Before we descend into the endless dark of the gaping maw, let us know in the comments, what is the most terrifying monster you've ever encountered in any fictional world? All right, strap in. Our story begins not with a creature, but with an empty throne and an abyss waiting for its king. To truly understand the origin of Demogorgon, you can't start with the creature itself. You have to start with its home, the abyss. It's not just a place. It's a living, malevolent, and infinitely expanding cancer on the multiverse. Imagine a reality born from a mistake, a wound in the fabric of creation that festered and grew. This is the abyss, a realm of endless layers, each one a unique pocket universe of exquisite torment and unrestrained chaos. In the beginning, this realm was not ruled by the demons we know today, the Tenari. It was the domain of the Oberiths, beings of a much older and more alien evil. The Oberiths were creatures of pure, unadulterated chaos, twisted into forms that could break a mortal mind just by looking at them. They were entropy given flesh. They ruled the abyss with an indifferent cruelty that was as natural to them as breathing. But their reign was not to last. A seed of rebellion, a new form of evil, was taking root. The Tenari, born from the raw chaos of the abyss but possessing a more recognizable, more relatable form of malice, ambition, hatred, cruelty, began to rise. They were led by a figure of immense power, the Queen of Chaos. She waged a war against the Oberiths, a conflict that tore the abyss apart for eons. In the end, the Tenari were victorious. The Oberiths were shattered, scattered, or forced into hiding, becoming whisperers and legends in their own former kingdom. With the old gods of the abyss defeated, a new hierarchy began to form. The most powerful Tenari carved out entire layers of the abyss for themselves, becoming the first demon lords, beings like Orcus, Grazist, and Yanogu. They were titans of evil, each a god in their own right. Yet, one title remained unclaimed, or rather, was held so loosely that it meant almost nothing: the Prince of Demons. To be Prince of Demons was not a formal investiture. It was a claim made through sheer, undeniable power. It meant that you were the one that all others, even the other demon lords, secretly feared. For a long time, no single demon lord could hold that title. Orcus, the Prince of Undeath, had his legions of specters and zombies. Grazist, the Dark Prince, had his seductive charms and labyrinthine political schemes. But none could command the respect, or rather the terror, needed to be the undisputed number one. The throne of the Prince of Demons was effectively empty. The abyss was a fractured empire of warring tyrants. It was into this power vacuum that something new began to stir. It wasn't an Oberith, and it wasn't quite a Tenari. It was something else, something that seemed to embody the fundamental, self-destructive nature of the abyss itself. In the deepest layers, a creature of impossible duality clawed its way into existence. It had the hulking, saurian body of a primordial beast, the tentacles of a kraken, and two hideous baboon-like heads, each with its own malevolent consciousness. This was Demogorgon. It didn't ask for power. It didn't scheme for it. It simply was power. Its arrival was not a grand announcement, but a slow, creeping realization among the other demon lords that something had fundamentally changed. The balance of power was not just shifting, it was being shattered. Demogorgon was the embodiment of chaos in its purest form, the chaos of internal conflict. This wasn't a calculated strategy, it was its very nature, and that made it more terrifying than any other being in the abyss. the true inciting incident for Demogorgon's reign, the moment it ceased to be just another powerful monster and became the Prince of Demons, was not a single grand battle against a rival. It was the moment the rest of the abyss truly understood its nature, the moment they realized the war it waged was not just against them, but against itself. This is the catalyst that cemented its legend. The two heads you see are not allies. They despise each other with a hatred more profound than any two separate beings could ever muster. They are eternally trapped together, two minds with opposing philosophies locked in a single, powerful form. One head, called Unravel, represents cunning, deception, and magic. It is the schemer, the strategist. It whispers lies that can unravel empires and weaves spells that can rot a soul from the inside out. The other head, Attribution, is the personification of brute force, destruction, and mindless rage. It feels no emotion, but fury, has no desire but to tear down and destroy. While Unravel plots, Attribution smashes. While Unravel concocts elaborate tortures, Attribution simply rips and rends. This eternal conflict should be a weakness, and for any other creature it would be. But for Demogorgon, it is the source of its terrifying power. Other demon lords could be predicted. You knew Orcus wanted to turn everything into undead slaves. You knew Grasist wanted to seduce and corrupt everything into his personal harem. Their motivations were, in their own twisted way, logical. But how do you predict a being whose two minds are constantly trying to undermine and betray each other? One moment, Demogorgon might be enacting a subtle, century-long plan to destabilize a rival's power base, a classic unravel move. The next, it might abandon that plan entirely, to go on a mindless rampage across several abyssal layers, simply because Attribution grew bored and asserted its will. The inciting incident was the slow dawning of this truth. Demon lords would send spies, and the spies would bring back contradictory reports. One would speak of a creature of immense magical power and intellect. Another would describe a rampaging beast of pure instinct. Both were right. They would try to form alliances against it, only to have those alliances crumble because they couldn't formulate a coherent strategy against an enemy that had no coherent strategy of its own. It fought on two fronts simultaneously, the external and the internal. The legend that truly began to spread was of a battle against an early rival, a forgotten demon lord who thought he could exploit this division. He used powerful magic to whisper promises to Unravel, offering to help it destroy Attribution and grant it sole control of their shared body. Unravel, ever the schemer, appeared to agree. It fed the rival information, detailing weaknesses in its own defenses, luring him into a trap. The rival lord, confident in his plan, launched his attack. But at the critical moment, Attribution, who had been listening to Unravel's plotting with silent fury, took over. It didn't just fight the rival, it annihilated him with a ferocity that shocked even the jaded denizens of the abyss. It wasn't just killing an enemy, it was punishing Unravel for its perceived betrayal. The rival lord wasn't just defeated, he was erased, his essence devoured in a display of such raw power that the message was clear. You cannot play one side against the other. The moment you think you have an accord with one head, the other will destroy you out of spite. This event, or stories like it, sent a shockwave through the abyssal hierarchy. Demogorgon wasn't just a demon lord. It was a living embodiment of the abyss's self-consuming chaos. It rose to the top, not by being the most organized or the most ambitious, but by being the most fundamentally abyssal. The other demon lords were just residents. Demogorgon was the abyss in flesh. And so, the title, Prince of Demons, was no longer empty. It was filled not by a coronation, but by a chilling, universal acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that in the realm of pure chaos, the most chaotic being of all is king. To truly grasp the horror of Demogorgon, you must dissect the war within. Amul and Hethradia are not just two personalities. They are two distinct entities, two rival gods shackled into a single, monstrous form. They are the key figures in the ongoing story of the Prince of Demons, and their conflict defines every aspect of its existence. Let's start with Amul, the left head. Amul is the mind, the intellect. If you were to have a conversation with Demogorgon, a terrible, terrible idea, it is Amul who would likely speak. Its voice would be sibilant, hypnotic, dripping with ancient knowledge and venomous lies. Amul's philosophy is that true power comes from control, manipulation, and the slow, patient erosion of your enemies. It believes in secrets, in plots that span millennia, in turning a foe's strength into their most profound weakness. Amul is the one who directs Demogorgon's vast network of cultists on the mortal planes. It doesn't demand blood sacrifices and mindless slaughter, not primarily. Instead, it offers forbidden knowledge. It whispers the secrets of creating new, horrifying life forms, of bending reality through dark magic, of achieving immortality through monstrous transformations. Its followers are not just crazed killers, they are mad scientists, disgraced wizards, and philosophers who have stared too long into the void. They see Demogorgon not as a beast of destruction, but as a patron of twisted creation. Amul's influence is subtle. It might cause a kingdom to fall, not by sending an army, but by whispering a single perfectly crafted lie into a king's ear, turning him against his most loyal advisors. It revels in the psychological torment of its victims, preferring to watch a mind unravel over decades than to simply crush a body in seconds. Then there is Hethradia, the right head. Hethradia is the body, the rage. It has no time for plots or secrets. It communicates in roars of pure, unadulterated fury. Its philosophy is simple. Everything that is not Demogorgon must be broken. Everything that stands must be toppled. Everything that lives must be torn apart. Hethradia is the source of Demogorgon's immense physical strength. It is the driving force behind the creature's devastating tail attacks and the life-draining touch of its tentacles. While Amul is building cults, Hethradia is raising armies of savage, monstrous beasts in the depths of Demogorgon's abyssal realm. Its followers are not scholars. They are barbarians, monsters, and killers who worship destruction for its own sake. They don't pray for knowledge. They pray for the strength to slaughter their enemies. Hethradia's influence is a battering ram. It sees a rival demon lord's fortress and doesn't bother with spies or sabotage. It simply walks up to the gates and tears them from their hinges, its roars shaking the foundations of the lair itself. The tension between these two is the engine of Demogorgon's power. Amul will spend centuries setting up an intricate plan, only for Hethradia to grow impatient and smash it to pieces in a fit of rage. Hethradia will be in the middle of a glorious, destructive rampage, only for Amul to suddenly seize control, seeing a more subtle opportunity, and teleport them away, leaving Hethradia bellowing in frustration. This constant internal struggle makes Demogorgon unpredictable and terrifyingly effective. An enemy preparing for a physical assault suddenly finds themselves facing a barrage of powerful spells from Amul. A wizard preparing their counterspells is suddenly charged by a creature of impossible speed and strength, driven by Hethradia. It's like fighting two different, immensely powerful foes at the exact same time, in the exact same body. Their factions, both in the abyss and on mortal worlds, are also in constant conflict. A coven of wizards loyal to Amul might find their sacred ritual site overrun by a horde of ravenous beasts sent by a tribe of barbarians loyal to Hethradia, with both groups claiming to serve the will of Demogorgon. And in a way, they are both right. This internal war is not a weakness. It is a filter. Any plan, any strategy must survive the scrutiny and opposition of the other head. The few plans that both heads agree on even for a moment, are terrifyingly potent. When Amel's cunning and Hethrodya's rage are focused on the same goal, the multiverse trembles. It is in these rare moments of unity that Demogorgon truly earns its title as the Prince of Demons. With the title of Prince of Demons firmly, if chaotically, established, Demogorgon's reign was no longer a question, but a fact. Yet, the Abyss is not a place for peaceful rule. The title was a magnet for challengers, and the first major conflict to truly test Demogorgon's supremacy came from the Lord of the Undead, Orcus. Orcus was and is one of the most powerful demon lords in existence, a bloated, ram-headed monstrosity wielding the legendary Wand of Orcus, a relic capable of snuffing out life with a touch. His goal was simple and absolute: to see all of existence dead, and then raised again as his mindless, undead servants. Life was an affront to him, and chaos was just a tool to achieve the perfect, silent order of the grave. This philosophy was a direct challenge to Demogorgon, who represented not death, but a twisted, teeming, and chaotic vision of life. The conflict was inevitable. It wasn't a formal declaration of war, but a series of escalating clashes across multiple layers of the Abyss and even into the mortal realms. It was a war fought on two fronts: philosophy and brute force. Amiel, Demogorgon's cunning head, saw Orcus's reliance on mindless undead as a weakness. It began to craft spells and whispers that could sever a necromancer's control over their minions, causing Orcus's own legions to turn on their masters or simply crumble to dust. It spread rumors through the Abyss that Orcus's power was failing, that his promises of undeath were a lie, peeling away his allies and cultists with paranoia and deception. Baumel fought a war of information and magic, striking at the very source of Orcus's power. Hethrodya, on the other hand, met Orcus's challenge head-on. Where Orcus sent a legion of skeletons, Hethrodya would charge in personally, a whirlwind of tentacles and rage, smashing them to powder. The clash was one of cosmic proportions. Imagine a battlefield in the Abyss. On one side, a silent, marching army of death, led by the hulking, malevolent Orcus. On the other, a tide of slithering, screeching monsters, led by the twin-headed Prince of Demons. The definitive confrontation, as legends tell it, took place on a neutral, blighted plain. Orcus, confident in his power, sought to end the conflict once and for all. He raised an army of unprecedented size, including skeletal titans and abyssal leeches. He believed he could overwhelm Demogorgon with sheer numbers and necrotic power. But he made a critical mistake. He planned for a single opponent. Demogorgon arrived, and the battle began. Hethrodya charged forward, a force of nature plunging into the heart of the undead army. It was a glorious, bloody spectacle, but it was a feint. While Hethrodya held the attention of Orcus and his lieutenants, Amel was weaving a spell of incredible complexity. It wasn't a spell of destruction, but of madness. Drawing on the inherent chaos of the Abyss, Amel didn't try to destroy the undead. It tried to give them back what they had lost, a twisted semblance of consciousness. The spell washed over the battlefield. The mindless skeletons suddenly had flashes of their former lives. The zombies felt phantom pangs of their mortal desires. They were not alive, but they were no longer completely mindless, and they were filled with a terrifying, chaotic rage at their state. The perfect, orderly ranks of Orcus's army shattered. Skeletons began attacking each other. Zombies clawed at their own flesh, and the liches found their control over the horde, flickering and dying. Orcus's greatest strength, his absolute control over the dead, had been turned into his greatest weakness. The immediate aftermath was a rout. Orcus, his army in chaos and Demogorgon bearing down on him, was forced to retreat, a humiliating blow to his pride and power. He was not destroyed, but he was beaten. The conflict solidified Demogorgon's position. It had faced one of the most powerful beings in the Abyss, and had won not just through strength, but through a terrifying combination of brute force and psychological warfare that no one else could replicate. The Abyss learned a valuable lesson. To fight Demogorgon is to fight a paradox. Prepare for the beast, and the mage will undo you. Prepare for the mage, and the beast will devour you. The Prince of Demons reigned, its dual nature now proven to be its most devastating weapon. After the resounding, if temporary, defeat of Orcus, Demogorgon entered a phase of consolidation. This wasn't a rebuilding in the traditional sense, as the Prince of Demons was never truly damaged. Instead, it was a period of deepening its roots, of transforming its abyssal layer into a perfect reflection of its own warped, dualistic nature. This is the era of the Gaping Maw, the 88th layer of the Abyss, Demogorgon's personal kingdom, and one of the most horrifying places in all of creation. The Gaping Maw is not a single landscape, it is two, locked in an eternal, violent embrace. The layer is dominated by a vast, churning ocean of briny, toxic water. From this ocean rise two colossal, serpentine spires of rock, each one twisting towards a sky of sickly green and purple clouds. One spire is named Amael, the other Hethradia. The spires don't touch, but they are close enough that massive arcs of lightning, raw chaotic energy, constantly leap between them. This is the heart of the realm. The rest of the layer is a direct manifestation of the two heads philosophies. One half of the Gaping Maw, under the conceptual influence of Amel, is a landscape of chilling, unnatural order. Here, you might find vast, silent forests of petrified trees, their branches twisted into screaming geometric shapes, or vast deserts of black glass, shattered into razor-sharp shards. In this part of the realm, Amel conducts its foul experiments. Hidden laboratories and libraries are carved into the landscape, where captured mages and scholars are forced to research new spells of madness and flesh warping. Here, Demogorgon's mind creates new forms of life, biological weapons designed to spread insanity and discord. These are not mindless beasts, but intelligent, cunning predators, each one a testament to Amel's belief in controlled, purposeful evil. This is where you might find the death dahlias or the mind molds, strange flora designed to control or shatter the minds of those who approach. The other half of the layer, a reflection of Hethradia, is pure, untamed savagery. It is a realm of steaming, primordial jungles, choked with venomous plants and swarming with monstrous, ravenous beasts. The rivers here run not with water, but with boiling acid. The trees are carnivorous, the branches ending in snapping maws. This is Hethradia's hunting ground. Here, brute strength is the only law. The creatures are not cunning. They are simply huge, strong, and perpetually hungry. This is the breeding ground for Demogorgon's shock troops, the mindless muscle that Hethradia unleashes upon its enemies. Ettins, hydras, and other more terrifying beasts that have no name roam these jungles, constantly fighting and devouring each other in a perfect ecosystem of violence. The capital of the Gaping Maw, if such a word can be used, is the fortress city of Abyssum. It is carved into the base of both towering spires, a city eternally divided. The half of the city on Amel's spire is a place of cold, silent towers and labyrinthine libraries. The half on Hethradia's spire is a collection of crude, brutal arenas and fighting pits. The two halves are in a constant state of low-level civil war, as the followers of each head vie for dominance. This period was not a time of peace for Demogorgon. It was a time of turning its gaze inward, of perfecting its domain. It filled the Gaping Maw with beings and landscapes that were extensions of its own internal conflict. It was here, in this lost era of relative external quiet, that Demogorgon honed its power, created its most terrifying minions, and turned its layer of the abyss into the ultimate fortress. place from which it could launch its future campaigns against the rest of reality. The gaping maw became a weapon in itself, a testament to the fact that for the Prince of Demons, even the act of rebuilding is an act of profound and horrifying creation. The abyss is a dynamic ecosystem of evil. Power vacuums are filled, and new threats are always emerging. While Demogorgon was solidifying its rule and Orcus was licking his wounds, a different kind of power was growing in the shadows of abyssal politics. This was not a power based on destructive rage or necrotic domination, but on something far more insidious: seduction, charm, and absolute tyranny of the self. This was the reemergence of Grazist, the Dark Prince, as a primary challenger to Demogorgon's throne. Grazist is a figure of profane beauty and utter corruption. Unlike the monstrous Demogorgon or the bloated Orcus, Grazist is strikingly handsome, a 9-foot-tall figure of dark, athletic perfection, with 6 fingers on each hand and skin the color of obsidian. He is the ultimate narcissist, believing that all of existence should be his to control, to admire, and to add to his collection of pleasures. His threat was not a new one, but it now re-emerged with greater potency. While Demogorgon was focused on the raw physical challenge of Orcus, Grazist was quietly expanding his own empire. His realm, Azagrat, is a trinity of abyssal layers linked by his own force of will, a kingdom dedicated to the fulfillment of every possible desire, no matter how debased. Grazist's new idea of power was revolutionary for the abyss. He didn't conquer with armies of screaming demons. He conquered with whispers. He offered other, lesser demon lords not destruction, but a place in his glorious, decadent society. He offered mortals not madness, but beauty, power, and pleasure, with the small price of their eternal soul and absolute servitude. He was building an empire based on contracts, alliances, and the willing submission of those who were dazzled by his splendor. This presented a unique problem for Demogorgon. How does a being of pure rage and division fight an enemy who wins by making his opponents not want to fight at all? Bethradia's approach to simply charge in and smash everything was useless against Grazist. Attacking one of Grazist's cities would only serve to prove Grazist's point to his followers that the rest of the abyss was savage and ugly, and only he could provide them with sophisticated protection. Iamel, the cunning head, recognized the true danger. Grazist was playing a different game, a game of politics and public relations that Demogorgon was ill-equipped to handle. Grazist was subtle. He would corrupt Demogorgon's own cultists, not by attacking them, but by sending emissaries who offered them a more enlightened path. They could serve a patron who was beautiful and offered them tangible, worldly power rather than a monstrous, two-headed beast who promised only madness and destruction. The new threat was the idea that evil could be beautiful, that tyranny could be seductive. Grazist began to position himself as the civilized alternative to the other demon lords. He was the connoisseur, the artist, the patron of a dark renaissance. In his court, you wouldn't find snarling beasts, but intelligent, beautiful demons, poets, and fallen celestials, all bound by their adoration for him. This ideological warfare was far more dangerous to Demogorgon than any physical threat. It threatened to erode its power base from the inside out. Amel and Hethradia were, for once, in a state of confused agreement. This new threat had to be dealt with. But how? Their internal conflict became a debate on strategy. Hethradia wanted to invade Azagrat directly, to tear down Grazist's perfumed palaces and show the abyss the weakness behind his pretty facade. Amel argued for a more subtle approach, to find the rotten core of Grazist's philosophy, his narcissism, and use it against him, to spread rumors that Grazist was a coward, that his beauty was an illusion, that his promises were empty. The reemergence of Grazist as a major player marked a new chapter in the history of the abyss. It was no longer just a brawl for supremacy. It was now a cold war, a battle of ideas, and Demogorgon, the prince of raw chaos, found itself facing a foe whose greatest weapon was something it could barely comprehend: charisma. The rise of Grazist and the continued simmering threat of Orcus ushered in a new era in the Abyss, a tense, multipolar Cold War. The simplistic hierarchy with Demogorgon at the top was fractured. Now, three titans of evil eyed each other across the plains, their conflicting ideologies creating a new, unstable political order. This new order was not defined by open warfare, but by proxy conflicts, espionage, and a constant, grinding paranoia. Demogorgon, Orcus, and Grazist formed a triangle of hatred, each preventing the other two from gaining ultimate power. If Demogorgon made a move against Orcus, Grazist would use the opportunity to seize territory or influence from both. If Grazist's seductive cults began to spread too far, Orcus and Demogorgon might, in a rare moment of shared interest, both move to crush them, albeit for different reasons. This external pressure exacerbated Demogorgon's greatest weakness, its own internal conflict. The debate between Amul and Hephrodia became more frantic, more desperate. The complex three-way political landscape was a nightmare for them to navigate. Hephrodia, the head of pure rage, could not understand the need for subtlety. It saw enemies on all sides, and its only instinct was to attack them all at once, a strategy that would have been suicidal. It would roar in frustration, straining against their shared form, demanding they launch an all-out assault on Thanatos, Orcus's realm, and Azagrat, Grazit's kingdom, simultaneously. Amul, the schemer, was in its own personal hell. It was trying to play a multi-dimensional chess game against two brilliant, if monstrous opponents, while being chained to a partner who wanted to smash the board at every turn. Amul would attempt to forge a temporary, secret alliance with one side to cripple the other, a classic political maneuver. It might whisper secrets to Orcus's lieutenants about a weakness in Grazist's defenses. But just as the plan was about to bear fruit, Hephrodia, in a fit of pure contrarian rage, would expose the plot simply to spite Amul for its scheming. This internal conflict manifested in Demogorgon's actions, making it seem even more erratic and unpredictable to its rivals. It would suddenly abandon a years-long campaign of subtle corruption to engage in a week of mindless destruction, before just as suddenly returning to its original plan. Its enemies saw this as a sign of madness, but it was simply the two heads wrestling for control. The new order also affected their followers. A cult dedicated to Demogorgon might find itself fighting not just witch hunters and paladins, but also the seductive agents of Grazist trying to convert them, and the ghoulish minions of Orcus trying to kill and reanimate them. Serving the Prince of Demons became an even more precarious proposition. This period was one of intense internal strife for Demogorgon. The pressure from its rivals was immense, but the true battle was being fought inside its own mind. Amul believed the only way to win was through a grand, unifying strategy that would outwit both Orcus and Grazist. Hephrodia believed the only way to win was through an act of overwhelming violence that would cow them into submission. Because they could never agree, Demogorgon was often paralyzed, its immense power held in check by its own indecision and internal sabotage. Yet, this paralysis was, in a strange way, a defense. Its rivals could never predict its next move, because Demogorgon itself didn't know what its next move would be. It was a slumbering volcano, and the new order of the Abyss was a constant tremor at its base, threatening an eruption that could either lead to its final victory or its own self-destruction. The Cold War raged on, and the twin heads of the Prince of Demons glared out at their enemies, and, perhaps with even more hatred, at each other. In the long, bloody history of Demogorgon, most of its interactions were with other demons, gods, or epic heroes bent on its destruction. But one event stands out as a peculiar and critical turning point: It wasn't a battle for a throne or a war for a plane. It was a bizarre, almost comical, yet deeply revealing encounter with a single mortal. This was the time Demogorgon summoned the legendary wizard Elminster Aumar, the Sage of Shadowdale, to its abyssal realm. Elminster is one of the most powerful and well-known mortal wizards in the Forgotten Realms. He is a chosen of Mystra, the goddess of magic, and has lived for centuries. His name synonymous with heroism and arcane might. So why would the Prince of Demons, a being of cosmic evil, summon him? The reason was rooted in a combination of Amal's arrogance and Hethradia's boredom. Amal, the cunning head, had become aware of Elminster's reputation. It saw not a hero to be feared, but a puzzle to be solved, a tool to be acquired. Amal believed that any mortal, no matter how powerful, could be broken or corrupted. It devised a plan to capture Elminster, to peel back the layers of his mind and steal the arcane secrets granted to him by a goddess. Ethradia, on the other hand, was simply intrigued by the idea of a mortal who was supposedly so powerful. It wanted to see if this Elminster would be a worthy morsel to crush. So, in a rare moment of agreement for entirely different reasons, they reached across the plains and pulled the unsuspecting wizard into the heart of the gaping maw, directly into their throne room in Abyssum. Elminster found himself standing before the towering, two-headed form of the Prince of Demons. Most mortals would have been driven insane on the spot, but Elminster, ever unflappable, simply stood his ground. What happened next became a legend. Amal began the interrogation. It spoke to Elminster, its voice a hypnotic poison, trying to pry open his mind with magical probes and silver-tongued lies. It asked him questions about the nature of the weave, the source of magic, and the secrets, the gods. Elminster, however, did not break. He answered their questions, but in a folksy, rambling, and utterly infuriating way. He treated the Prince of Demons not as a cosmic horror, but as a slightly dim-witted brute who needed things explained in simple terms. He obfuscated. He told long-winded anecdotes. He changed the subject. He essentially gave the god of deception a masterclass in trolling. Amal grew increasingly frustrated. Its psychic probes were met with images of pipeweed and good ale. Its profound questions about the cosmos were answered with farming advice. While Amal was being mentally stonewalled, Ethradia was growing impatient. This was not the epic confrontation it had envisioned. It was a boring conversation. Finally, Ethradia lost its temper. It roared, interrupting Amal, and declared that it would simply tear the secrets from Elminster's corpse. But as Ethradia lunged forward, Amal, furious at the interruption of its delicate work, used its own psychic power to momentarily stall their shared body. The two heads began to argue right there in front of their captive. Ethradia accused Amal of being weak and ineffective. Amal accused Ethradia of being a thoughtless savage. While the two heads of Demogorgon were bickering with each other, Elminster, seeing his opportunity, cast a powerful teleportation spell and simply vanished, leaving the Prince of Demons arguing with itself in an empty throne room. This event was a critical turning point because it was a profound humiliation. Demogorgon, the Lord of the Abyss, had been outsmarted and escaped by a single mortal, not through a great feat of arms, but by exploiting its most fundamental flaw. The story spread, and for the first time, Demogorgon was not just feared, but in some circles, laughed at. This humiliation galvanized the two heads. It was a wake-up call. Their internal conflict had made them vulnerable in a new and embarrassing way. The event forced them to reconsider their methods and stoke the fires of their ambition to prove their power to the multiverse once and for all. The brief, almost absurd encounter with Elminster Aumar planted a seed of fury in both of Demogorgon's minds, a seed that would later blossom into one of its most ambitious and destructive plots ever. The humiliation of the Elminster incident festered within Demogorgon's twin minds. The laughter of their rivals echoed across the abyss. This private shame, combined with the unending pressure of the Cold War, pushed the Prince of Demons to a breaking point. It needed to do something so catastrophic, so undeniable, that no one would ever dare mock its name again. This ambition culminated in the grand, terrifying plot detailed in the Savage Tide adventure path, a plan that represented a true transformation for Demogorgon, and one that would lead to its first major fall. The plan, primarily conceived by Amel, but fueled by Hethrodya's apocalyptic rage, was simple in its goal, but breathtaking in its scale. Demogorgon intended to merge its own abyssal realm, the gaping maw, with a mortal world. It would not conquer the world. It would drown it, transforming it into a new, twisted reflection of its own chaotic domain. The linchpin of this plan was a powerful artifact known as the Serpent's Coils, which, when brought together, could manipulate the very fabric of planar boundaries. The plot was a masterwork of Amel's cunning. It was a multi-stage operation involving dozens of cults, powerful minions, and the manipulation of events across an entire world. For years, its agents worked in the shadows, gathering the pieces of the artifact, destabilizing kingdoms, and preparing the world for the final, terrible ritual. Hethrodya's influence was felt in the sheer violence of the plan. The world wouldn't just be politically destabilized, it would be racked by unnatural disasters. Plagues of monstrous sea creatures summoned from the depths of the gaping maw would terrorize the coastlines. Savage, Demogorgon-worshipping tribes would descend from the mountains, their brutality a direct expression of Hethrodya's will. This was Demogorgon at its most unified, and therefore its most dangerous. But this grand ambition also made it vulnerable. By focusing so much of its power and attention on a single mortal world, it exposed itself. It drew the attention of a group of powerful, determined heroes who began to unravel its plot piece by piece. They fought its cultists, defeated its monstrous lieutenants, and began to collect the pieces of the Serpent's Coils for themselves. The conflict escalated until the heroes, against all odds, managed to take the fight directly to Demogorgon. They journeyed into the heart of the gaping maw itself. Here, they faced the full, undivided fury of the Prince of Demons. The battle was cataclysmic, but the heroes had a plan. They had learned of Demogorgon's weakness, its internal division. They didn't try to match it, blow for blow. Instead, they used powerful magic and clever tactics to force the two heads into conflict. They would strike at Hethrodya, causing it to fly into a blind rage, which in turn would disrupt the complex spells Amel was trying to cast. They would use illusions to make it seem as if Amel was hoarding power for itself, enraging Hethrodya. In a critical moment, the heroes managed to use the very artifacts Demogorgon sought to sever its connection to the gaping maw, its source of power. Weakened and disoriented, the Prince of Demons was, for the first time, truly vulnerable. The heroes struck the final blow. Demogorgon was not truly killed. It is nearly impossible to permanently destroy a being of its stature, but it was defeated. Its physical form was destroyed, its consciousness cast out into the infinite chaos of the abyss, forced into a long period of hibernation and recovery. This was a monumental fall. The great Prince of Demons, the terror of the abyss, had been laid low by a band of mortals. The Savage Tide plot had failed. The aftermath sent shockwaves through the abyss. Orcus and Grazis immediately moved to seize Demogorgon's territory and followers. The gaping maw fell into chaos. The fall and subsequent transformation were profound. Demogorgon learned a bitter lesson. Ambition on a mortal scale invited mortal interference. When it finally reformed, it would be changed. Its hatred for mortals would be more personal, more venomous, and its understanding of its own vulnerability would make it even more paranoid, and therefore even more dangerous. The slumbering prince would dream of revenge. During Demogorgon's long slumber and recovery after the Savage Tide fiasco, the power dynamics of the abyss shifted, but one ancient presence remained, as it always had, in the shadows. This was not a new rival in the vein of Orcus or Grazist, but a being far older, far more alien, and in many ways, far more terrifying. This is the introduction of Dagon into the lore of Demogorgon, a figure who is less of an antagonist and more of a dark mentor, a whisper of a forgotten evil that shapes the prince of demons from the depths. Dagon is not a Tanari. He is one of the last and most powerful of the ancient Obyriths, the original rulers of the abyss. While most of his kind were destroyed or driven into hiding during the rise of the Tanari, Dagon survived. He did this not through overt warfare, but by retreating into the deepest, most inaccessible layers of the abyss, into the lightless, crushing depths of its oceans. Dagon is a creature of the deep sea, a being of immense size and power, whose form is a blasphemous mockery of aquatic life. He is a being of pure primordial chaos, but unlike the raging fire of the Tanari, his is the cold, silent, and inevitable chaos of the crushing abyss. He has seen empires of evil rise and fall. He has seen demon lords crown themselves and be torn down. He is ancient beyond comprehension. The relationship between Demogorgon and Dagon is one of the great mysteries of the abyss. It is said that Demogorgon, in its own realm of the gaping maw, with its vast, toxic ocean, is a neighbor of sorts to Dagon's watery domain. It is also said that Dagon is the one being that Demogorgon does not openly challenge. There is a measure of respect, or perhaps fear, that the Prince of Demons shows to the ancient Obyrith. Dagon acts as a secret advisor to Demogorgon. He doesn't command or demand. He whispers. He possesses knowledge that predates the Tanari, secrets of the fundamental nature of the abyss and the multiverse that Hamal, for all its intellect, desperately craves. Dagon is the one who whispers to Amal about the weaknesses of the gods, about the forgotten pathways between the planes, about the nature of reality itself. Why would Dagon help his racial enemy, the Prince of the Tanari, who overthrew his kind? Because Dagon's goals are far grander and more patient. He sees in Demogorgon a perfect tool. Demogorgon's dualistic, self-destructive nature is the ultimate expression of the pure chaos that the Obyriths embody. Dagon doesn't want the title of Prince of Demons. It's a petty squabble to a being of his age. He wants to see the entire multiverse dissolved back into the primordial chaos from which it came. And Demogorgon is the perfect agent of that dissolution. Dagon's introduction into Demogorgon's story adds a new, terrifying layer. It suggests that Demogorgon's ambition, its rage, its very nature, might not be entirely its own. Amil's most brilliant plans may have been seeded by whispers from the deep. Hethridia's most destructive rages may have been subtly encouraged by Dagon's influence, pushing Demogorgon towards ever greater acts of cosmic vandalism. Dagon is the antagonist behind the antagonist. He is the old evil that manipulates the new. His presence reframes Demogorgon's story. Is the Prince of Demons truly the master of its own destiny? Or is it a puppet, albeit the most powerful puppet in existence, dancing on the strings of an ancient evil that dreams of unmaking all things? This relationship makes Demogorgon even more terrifying. It's not just a monster of rage and intellect. It's a monster guided by a malevolence that is older than the stars. When Demogorgon finally reawakened from its defeat, it was not just with its own renewed fury, but with the ancient, chilling whispers of Dagon echoing in its twin minds, pushing it towards a new conflict, one that would not just target a single world, but threaten the very foundations of the prime material plane. After its long period of forced regeneration, Demogorgon was back, its rage honed to a razor's edge, and its ambition stoked by the humiliating memories of its defeat and the dark whispers of Dagon. It was during this period that the second major, large-scale conflict involving the Prince of Demons erupted, a conflict with stakes far broader than any abyssal power struggle. This was the event known as the Rage of Demons, a crisis that began when Demogorgon, along with a host of other demon lords, was accidentally summoned from the abyss, not into a prepared ritual circle, but into the vast subterranean realm of the Underdark. This was a catastrophe of epic proportions. A group of powerful drow archmages, in a bid for greater power, had attempted a complex summoning ritual, but their control was shattered. The ritual went horribly wrong, and instead of summoning a single, controllable entity, they ripped open a gaping wound to the abyss. Through this wound poured not just one, but a collection of the most powerful demon lords in existence: Orcus, Grazist, Yenogu, Baphomet, and at the head of them all, Demogorgon. The demon lords were freed from the political stalemate of the abyss and unleashed upon a new, unsuspecting world. The Underdark, a realm already teeming with danger and ancient evil, was plunged into absolute chaos. This was not a planned invasion. It was a random, violent explosion of abyssal power onto the prime material plane. Demogorgon, free from the constraints of its own realm, was a force of pure, untamed destruction. It immediately began to carve out a territory, its very presence warping the environment around it. The subterranean lakes and rivers of the Underdark began to teem with monstrous mutated life. The native creatures of the Underdark were either slaughtered or driven into a frenzy of madness by its aura. The stakes of this conflict were immense. This was no longer about who would rule the abyss. This was about the potential destruction of the entire Underdark, and if the demon lords were not stopped, the surface world as well. The various factions of the Underdark, the Drow, the Duergar, the Myconids, were forced to either ally with a demon lord for protection or be annihilated. The conflict was not just a war of armies, but a war of realities. Each demon lord began to transform their corner of the Underdark into a small-scale replica of their abyssal home. Orcus created vast necropolises filled with undead. Grazist established courts of debased pleasure, and Demogorgon created a sprawling, savage kingdom of madness and mutation. Its two heads were in their element. Aphrodite reveled in the endless slaughter, leading charges against the other demon lords' forces and the hapless inhabitants of the Underdark. Hamel, meanwhile, was fascinated by the new environment, studying the unique magical properties of the Underdark's fauna and flora, particularly the massive fungi, and twisting them to its own purposes. It began to spread a new form of madness, a psychic spore that could drive entire communities insane. This conflict was broader because it was a multi-front war. Demogorgon wasn't just fighting heroes, it was fighting Orcus, Grazist, and the other demon lords in a free-for-all, a battle royale of the gods of evil. The alliances were fleeting and treacherous. One day, Demogorgon might find itself fighting alongside Orcus's undead against a common foe, and the next, its two heads would be locked in combat with the Prince of Undeath over a strategic cavern. The Rage of Demons was the ultimate expression of abyssal chaos brought to the mortal world, and at the heart of that storm, roaring with triumphant fury, was the Prince of Demons himself. The Rage of Demons plunged the Underdark into an unprecedented vortex of violence. The demon lords, unleashed and unchecked, battled for supremacy, with the mortal inhabitants caught in the crossfire. This chaos could not last forever. It was building towards a single, cataclysmic confrontation. The heroes of the Underdark, along with their powerful allies, realized they could not defeat the demon lords one by one. The only hope was to engineer a situation where the demons would destroy each other. This led to a desperate, brilliant, and horrifying plan, culminating in a devastating loss for the entire region. The plan centered on a place of ancient knowledge and power called Graven Hollow, a library that held the memories of all who had walked its halls. Here, the heroes learned the secrets of the Demon Lord's weaknesses and their immense, all-consuming hatred for one another. They discovered that they could create a lure, a beacon of immense magical energy that would draw all the Demon Lords to a single location. The goal was to concentrate their power and ego in one place and let their mutual animosity do the rest. The chosen location was a massive cavern near the drow city of Menzoberranzan. The heroes, using powerful artifacts and drow magic, created the lure. And the Demon Lords, each believing they were being drawn to a source of ultimate power that would grant them victory over their rivals, came. What followed was not a battle. It was an apocalypse in miniature. Demogorgon was the first to arrive, his massive form shaking the very foundations of the cavern. He was soon followed by Orcus, Grazist, and the others. For a moment, there was a tense silence as these titans of evil faced each other, their collective malevolence so great it threatened to tear the reality of the cavern apart. And then the fighting began. Demogorgon, as the Prince of Demons, immediately engaged his primary rivals. Athredia's roars echoed through the Underdark as it charged Orcus, their monstrous bodies colliding with the force of an earthquake. Amel, meanwhile, unleashed a torrent of psychic and arcane energy at Grazist, who parried with his own elegant, deadly spells. The battle was a whirlwind of chaos. Demonic legions clashed, undead hordes swarmed, and the very rock of the cavern was melted by hellfire and necrotic energy. The heroes, who had orchestrated this madness, could only watch in horror from the sidelines, their role now reduced to trying to contain the fallout. The devastating loss was not for any single demon lord, but for the Underdark itself. The sheer concentration of abyssal energy corrupted the land for miles in every direction, creating a permanent wound in the prime material plane. The collateral damage was immense. Entire ecosystems were annihilated. Ancient cities and landmarks were erased from existence. The sacrifice was made by the heroes and their allies. They had willingly invited this level of destruction into their world as the only alternative to total subjugation. They sacrificed a part of their world to save the whole, a terrible choice with consequences that would last for centuries. In the end, the heroes were able to use the chaos of the battle to enact a final ritual, one that would banish the weakened demon lords back to the abyss. One by one, their physical forms were destroyed or forced back through the planar rift. Demogorgon, locked in a death grip with Orcus, was one of the last to fall. Roaring in fury and frustration, its form dissolved, its essence hurled back to the gaping maw. The battle was over. The Underdark was saved, but the cost was staggering. The land was scarred, poisoned, and haunted by the echoes of the Demon Lord's rage. It was a victory, but one that felt perilously close to a defeat. The banishment from the Underdark was a different kind of defeat for Demogorgon. The loss during the Savage Tide was a humiliation at the hands of mortals. This was a tactical retreat from a battle against its peers, a battle it was arguably winning. The psychological fallout from this event was immense and served to deepen the cracks in Demogorgon's already fractured psyche. Thrown back into the confines of the gaping maw, the two heads turned on each other with a renewed and venomous fury. The immediate aftermath was a storm of recrimination. Athredia, the beast, was incandescent with rage. It had been in its element in the Underdark, a whirlwind of pure destruction. It had tasted glorious, unending combat against its greatest rivals and had been ripped away from it at the peak of its frenzy. In its simplistic view, the failure was one of strategy and cunning. It blamed Amel. It roared that Amel's subtle plots and attempts to spread psychic spores had been a waste of time. They should have focused purely on annihilation. If Amel had not been so distracted by its clever schemes, Athredia believed, They would have crushed all opposition and claimed the prime material plane as their own. The rage was so intense that the gaping maw itself convulsed. The seas boiled, the jungles burned, and the two spires of their fortress cracked under the strain of their shared fury. Amel, the schemer, experienced the loss in a completely different way. It saw the retreat as a colossal strategic failure, a miscalculation of epic proportions. It had underestimated the mortal's capacity to manipulate them. It had failed to predict that its rivals could be brought together in such a way. For a mind that prides itself on omniscience and control, this was a profound intellectual wound. Amel blamed Hethrodaia's recklessness. It argued that Hethrodaia's mindless rampages had drawn too much attention, uniting their enemies against them. If Hethradia had shown a shred of restraint, Amel could have worked from the shadows, corrupting the Underdark from within, a subtle and permanent victory. Instead, Hethradia's lust for battle had turned them into a giant, obvious target. This internal conflict went beyond mere argument. It became a state of being. Demogorgon entered a period of intense, self-destructive madness. Its actions within the gaping maw became even more erratic. It would spend centuries building a complex magical artifact, only to smash it to pieces moments before completion. It would raise a mighty army and then order it to march into the boiling sea. The two heads were actively sabotaging each other on a grand scale, their shared body, the battlefield, for their mutual hatred. This psychological fallout had a chilling effect on its followers. The cults of Demogorgon became even more schizophrenic. One cell, following the whispers of Amel, would be focused on patient, secretive infiltration of a kingdom. Another, inspired by Hethrodaia's rage, would launch a suicidal attack on a fortified city. The two factions of its own religion were now at open war with each other, a perfect mirror of their god's internal state. This period of madness, however, was not just a downward spiral. In the depths of its rage and frustration, a new, terrifying resolve began to form. Both heads, in their own way, came to the same conclusion. Their division was the source of their vulnerability. The problem wasn't the mortals, or Orcus, or Grazist. The problem was each other. This realization would not lead to reconciliation. Instead, it would lead to the most terrifying ambition in Demogorgon's history, the desire for one head to finally, permanently, destroy the other. The Prince of Demons was beginning to contemplate self-annihilation as a path to ultimate power. Out of the depths of its self-destructive madness, a new, ultimate goal began to coalesce within Demogorgon's twin minds. The constant cycle of ambition, conflict, and frustrating defeat had led both Amel and Hethrodaia to the same terrifying conclusion. The endless war against their rivals, against the gods, against reality itself, was secondary. The real war, the final war, was against each other. The final push was not for a throne or a kingdom, but for sole dominion over their shared body. The ultimate preparation was for a form of cosmic suicide. Amel, the mind, came to believe that Hethrodaia's brute, uncontrollable rage was the anchor that held them back from true, lasting power. It saw Hethrodaia as a flawed, primitive tool. Amel dreamed of a state of pure, cold, calculating intellect. If it could only excise the raging beast it was shackled to, it could enact plans of such subtlety and scope that the multiverse would be remade in its image without a single, messy battle. Amel's final push became a secret, internal plot. It began to research ancient, forbidden magic that could devour a soul, erase a consciousness. It began to subtly manipulate their shared body's biology, searching for a weakness, a way to poison or paralyze the other head from within. Its goal was to perform a kind of psychic surgery on itself, to kill Hethradia and absorb its raw physical power, becoming a single, perfect being of mind and might. Hethradia, the beast, came to the opposite conclusion through its own, simpler logic. It saw Amel's plotting and scheming as the source of all their failures. It was cowardice. It was weakness. Amel's need to think, to plan, had repeatedly held them back from the glorious simple path of total destruction. Athradia's final push was far more direct. It didn't scheme. It simply began to focus its immense physical will on the act of overpowering Amel. It began to actively resist Amel's control over their body, attempting to starve it of the magical energy it needed to cast spells. Its goal was to, through sheer, unrelenting physical dominance, crush Amel's consciousness into submission, to effectively render it brain-dead, leaving Athradiah in sole, roaring control of their form. This new, ultimate ambition is the most terrifying thing about Demogorgon. Its goal is no longer just to impose its chaotic nature on the universe. Its goal is to resolve that chaos through an act of self-mutilation on a cosmic scale. This is the preparation for the end. Not the end of the world, but the end of Demogorgon, as it has always been known. This internal arms race defines its modern existence. Every action it takes is now a feint, a move in this internal chess game. If it attacks a rival, is it to gain power, or is it a maneuver by one head to put the other in a vulnerable position? If it offers a secret to a cultist, is it to further its cause, or is it an experiment by Amel to test a soul-destroying spell it plans to one day use on Athradiah? This grand, nihilistic philosophy is the logical endpoint of its existence. A being born of conflict must eventually turn that conflict inward to its most absolute conclusion. The final push for Demogorgon is to answer the question that has defined it since its birth. Which is stronger, the mind that schemes or the fist that smashes? And it is willing to tear itself apart to find the answer. The rest of creation is just the arena for this final, terrible experiment. What would it look like? The final confrontation, the ultimate end of the being known as Demogorgon. Given its nature, the climax of its story cannot be a simple battle against a shining hero. The final enemy Demogorgon must face is, and always has been, itself. The final confrontation would be the culmination of the secret war between Amel and Athradiah, an internal battle that finally erupts into physical, world-shattering reality. The setting for this climax could be anywhere, but it would most fittingly be the gaping maw, its own realm turning against itself. Imagine the scene. The two spires of their fortress, which have always represented the two heads, begin to crumble. The boiling sea rises, and the savage jungles catch fire. The very fabric of the layer comes undone as the two minds that sustain it go to war. The trigger could be anything, perhaps a final, unforgivable betrayal. Amel, believing its soul-trap spell is finally ready, makes its move. Or Athradiah, sensing this betrayal, decides to end things with one final, all-out physical assault. The confrontation would be a spectacle of paradoxical violence. Amel would weave spells of incredible power, not aimed at an external foe, but at its own body. It would try to paralyze their shared limbs, to sever the nerves that lead to Athradiah's head, to shut down the furious heart that fuels its rage. We would see Demogorgon's own tentacles, animated by Amel's magic, attempting to constrict Athradiah's throat. Athradiah, in turn, would fight back with pure, physical force. It would slam their shared body against the spires of their own fortress, trying to crush Amel through blunt trauma. It would use its immense strength to try and literally rip Amel's head from their shared neck. The battle would be a grotesque, horrifying ballet of self-destruction. There are two primary theories on how this could end. The first is mutual annihilation. In their all-consuming hatred, they succeed in mortally wounding each other at the exact same time. As Amel's soul-killing poison finally takes hold, Athradiah's final desperate lunge succeeds in crushing Amel's skull. The great body of Demogorgon would shudder, and then, for the first time in its existence, fall silent. The light would fade from both sets of eyes, and the prince of demons would be dead, killed by the only foe it could never outwit or overpower, itself. The second, and perhaps more terrifying possibility, is that one of them wins. Let's say Amul succeeds. It erases Hethrodaia's consciousness, absorbing its raw power. What rises from the battlefield is a new Demogorgon, a single-headed entity of immense physical power, but guided now by a single, cold, unified, and utterly malevolent intellect. This new being would be far more dangerous than the original. It would be predictable, yes, but predictable in its terrifying efficiency. There would be no more internal conflict, no more erratic behavior. Just a single, cosmic-level intellect with a godlike body bent on the subjugation of all reality. Its victory would be the universe's loss. This final confrontation, whether it ends in oblivion or a horrifying apotheosis, is the true climax of Demogorgon's lore. It is the story of a being created from division, who lives in a state of eternal civil war, and whose final act must be the ultimate resolution of that conflict. The death or transformation of the Prince of Demons would be an event that reshapes the very nature of evil in the multiverse. The moment the final blow lands, the moment the war within Demogorgon ceases, the multiverse would not breathe a sigh of relief. It would hold its breath, waiting for the consequences. The immediate aftermath of Demogorgon's demise would be a shockwave of chaos far greater than any it caused in life. First, consider the abyss. The title of Prince of Demons, a position held for eons by a being of unimaginable power, is suddenly vacant. The throne is empty. This creates a power vacuum of a scale not seen since before Demogorgon's own rise. The Cold War between the demon lords is instantly over, replaced by a hot, all-consuming free-for-all. Orcus, Grazist, Yinoku, Baphomet, and a dozen other aspirants who were too afraid to challenge Demogorgon directly would immediately launch campaigns to seize the title. The abyss would descend into a civil war that would make all previous conflicts look like minor squabbles. Entire layers would be destroyed, ancient alliances would shatter, and new, terrifying entities might rise from the chaos. The blood war, the eternal conflict between the demons and the devils, would be thrown into disarray. The devils of the nine hells, longtime observers of demonic politics, might see this as the perfect opportunity to launch a massive invasion of the abyss, hoping to strike a decisive blow while their enemies are in chaos. Or, conversely, the lack of a unifying figure of fear like Demogorgon might make the demon hordes even more unpredictable and savage, a foe that cannot be reasoned with or strategized against. Then there is the gaping maw. Demogorgon's realm is a direct extension of its dual consciousness. What happens when that consciousness is gone? If Demogorgon is truly dead, the layer might simply unravel. The boiling seas could evaporate, the spires crumble to dust, the entire plane dissolving back into the raw, unformed chaos of the abyss. Its unique creations, the monsters born from its twin minds, would either be wiped from existence or scattered across the plains, unhinged and leaderless. If one head had won, the gaping maw would be violently reshaped in the victor's image. If Amul won, it would become a cold, silent realm of libraries and laboratories. If Hethrodaia won, it would become a singular, endless jungle of pure, savage violence. The resolution for the wider multiverse would be one of profound uncertainty. The cults of Demogorgon would collapse. Some might seek a new patron, while others might become even more dangerous, true nihilists with no master to obey. The cosmic balance of power between good, evil, law, and chaos would be violently upended. Demogorgon, for all its evil, was a known quantity. Its absence creates a void, and as the saying goes, nature, especially the nature of the cosmos, abhors a vacuum. The immediate aftermath would not be peace. It would be a frantic, terrifying scramble as a million different evils, large and small, rush to fill the space once occupied by the Prince of Demons. The death of the king doesn't end the war. It just begins a new, more desperate battle for the crown. The death of Demogorgon would feel like a victory, a great evil vanquished. But as the dust settled and the new reality took shape, the true cost of this victory would begin to unravel, and it would be a cost far greater than anyone could have imagined. The central issue is that Demogorgon, in its own horrific way, was a stabilizing force. Its immense power and unpredictable nature kept the other demon lords in check. It was the apex predator in an ecosystem of monsters. Removing the apex predator doesn't bring peace to the jungle. It causes the entire ecosystem to collapse in on itself, often resulting in an even more chaotic and dangerous environment. The first cost would be the rise of a successor. Who would claim the throne? If it's Orcus, the multiverse faces a future where all life is systematically extinguished and raised into a silent, eternal army of the dead. A universe under Orcus is a universe without thought, without feeling, without hope, just cold, unending servitude. If Grazes takes the throne, the threat is more subtle, but just as absolute. It would be a multiverse ruled by seduction and corruption, where free will is an illusion, and every soul is eventually bent to the whims of a single, narcissistic tyrant. A universe under Grazes is a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but empty and soulless within. The true horror is that either of these stable outcomes might be preferable to the most likely one. No one claims the throne for long. The title of Prince of Demons becomes a revolving door of vicious, short-lived tyrants, each one more desperate and destructive than the last. Their reigns marked by brief, Pyrrhic victories before they are torn down by the next contender. The abyss, and by extension, its influence on the mortal worlds, would become a meat grinder of pure, unending chaos. There's another, more metaphysical cost to consider. Demogorgon is the embodiment of a fundamental cosmic principle, the creative tension of duality and conflict. It is rage and intellect, destruction and creation, all bound together. What happens when you remove that principle from the universe? Perhaps the energy that was once contained within Demogorgon is not destroyed, but unleashed. A wave of pure, unadulterated madness could wash over the multiverse, not as an invading army, but as a subtle plague of the mind. The internal conflict that defined Demogorgon could become externalized, infecting everyone. Alliances would crumble, kingdoms would fall into civil war for no reason, and individuals would be torn apart by their own contradictory impulses. The victory over Demogorgon would mean that we had simply released its essential nature into the world, like a virus. The cost of victory, therefore, is the realization that you have traded a single, identifiable monster for 1,000,000 intangible ones. You have traded a tyrant for anarchy. You have killed a demon only to unleash a metaphysical disease. The heroes who finally defeated the Prince of Demons might find themselves living in a world that is, in many ways, worse than the one they fought to protect. They would learn the ultimate, bitter lesson of the cosmos. Some evils are so immense, so fundamental, that they become a part of the structure of reality. And removing a load-bearing wall, no matter how ugly it is, will bring the whole house down long after its physical form is gone, long after the abyss has crowned a new prince or collapsed into infighting. The legacy of Demogorgon would endure. Its impact is not just in the battles it fought or the realms it ruled, but in the idea it represents. And that idea has bled out from the arcane tomes of Dungeons and Dragons and into the very fabric of our modern pop culture, most notably in the quiet town of Hawkins, Indiana. The long-term legacy of Demogorgon is that it has become the archetypal big bad. When the creators of Stranger Things needed a name for their first terrifying monster from another dimension, they didn't just pick one at random. They chose Demogorgon. Why? Because the name itself carries weight. For anyone who had ever played D&D, that name immediately signified not just a monster, but a top-tier, capital E evil. It set a tone of ultimate, world-ending stakes from the very first season. The Demogorgon in Stranger Things is, of course, a very different creature. It is not a twin-headed demon lord with a complex personality. It's a predatory, interdimensional beast, more akin to a shark or a xenomorph. It is, in essence, a physical manifestation of Hephrodhiah's side of the original concept. Pure, savage, predatory instinct. It hunts, it kills, it serves a greater hive mind. But the choice of the name was a masterstroke. It linked the creature to a deeper, richer lore, even if that lore was not explicitly part of the show. It told the audience, the thing that took Will Byers is not just a monster, it is a Demogorgon. It is a piece of something much larger and more terrifying than you can currently see. As the show progressed, this legacy deepened. The Demodogs of Season 2 are a clear parallel to the endless, monstrous hordes that Hephrodhiah would command. The Mind Flayer, the show's true antagonist for a time, functions much like Aimeal, the cunning mind, controlling its minions from afar, spreading its influence like a psychic plague. Vecna, the ultimate villain, is a fusion of D&D's most iconic lich and a being who shares Demogorgon's desire to reshape a world in his own twisted image. The showrunners used the hierarchy of D&D villainy as a narrative roadmap. Demogorgon was the foot soldier, the terrifying introduction. The Mind Flayer was the general. Vecna was the king. But the legacy started with Demogorgon. Its impact is also felt in the very concept of the Abyssal Lord. Demogorgon set the standard for what a demon lord should be. Not just a powerful monster, but a being with a philosophy, a domain, and a unique, terrifying method of spreading its evil. Every major demon lord in fantasy, in some way, lives in the shadow of the trifecta of Demogorgon, Orcus, and Grazist. It represents the idea that the greatest evils are not simple, but complex, often paradoxical. That true horror lies not in a monster that wants to kill you, but in one whose very existence is a contradiction you cannot comprehend. The long-term impact of Demogorgon is that of a perfect nightmare. It is a symbol of the terrifying idea that the greatest enemy is the one within, that chaos is not just an external force, but an internal one, and that some wars can never, ever be won. From the pages of a gamebook to the screens of millions, the Prince of Demons endures, a testament to the power of a truly great and terrifying idea. We have journeyed to the heart of the abyss. We have witnessed the rise and fall of a chaotic god, and we have seen its shadow stretch into our own world. The story of Demogorgon is a story of conflict, the conflict of rage versus intellect, of destruction versus deception, of a being eternally at war with itself. It is the perfect embodiment of the abyss, a place that creates only to consume, a power that grows only by tearing itself apart. Its greatest enemy was, and always will be, itself. But this concept, this terrifying duality, is not confined to some imaginary realm of demons and magic. It is a fundamental pattern of existence. And so, we are left with one final, haunting question. What if the war between Aimeal and Hephrodhiah is not just the story of a monster, but a metaphor for a battle that rages within all things? What if the chaos it represents is not just in the abyss, but waiting, dormant, in the quietest corners of our own world? A conflict of two minds waiting for the right moment to tear everything apart.